Hello, and welcome to a level up topic on reading signals in draft. I think it is one of the most important things to know how to do if you want to be better at drafting, and I think that reading signals can drastically improve your win percentage. I think it's one of the biggest aha moments for newer players, and so this video is going to pretty much tell you what signals are, how to read them, and help you avoid some of the common pitfalls that a lot of people stumble into when they first figure out what signals are. But before I begin, I would just like to remind you that if you enjoy the video, be sure to click that thumbs up and subscribe to get updates whenever I post new content. But let's get into it. So first of all, what are signals? Signals are information you gain through deductive reasoning during the drafting portion. So for example, if you see a strong red card, 5th pick, and you think that it should have been taken already, then you might think, oh, maybe I should be drafting red, and you are reading a red signal. However, it is important to realize that signals are a subjective thing. They're not set in stone. And what I mean by this is that just because you see a strong 5th pick red card, circumstances in the draft do not always mean that the person to your right is not playing red. So maybe there was another red card that they liked more. Maybe they are red-black and they took a strong black card instead of the red card. You can't just assume that red is open because you see one signal. You have to take all of the signals together to figure out what colors the person to your right might be playing. Also, another thing with signals is that you can also get signals from what's not in the pack. So if you first pick a red rare and then you don't see a red card worth picking for the rest of the first pack, then you might also assume that red is not open and use a little of the opposite reasoning, like what isn't there, to figure out what the person to your right is and therefore what you should be drafting and what you should not be drafting. So when you're receiving signals, there's several different types of signals you can receive. The three main types are the monocolored signals, which are the ones we already discussed, where you see a strong red card late and you think, okay, I should maybe be drafting red, and then you take the red card and then you see what happens from there. That is the most common type of signal, but then there's also a couple others. There are gold card signals, and what I mean when I say that is that sometimes you'll be solidly in one color. So say I've been taking green cards the entire draft, and all of a sudden I see a blue-green uncommon 6th pick, and it's one of the better uncommons in the set. And so even if I haven't been seeing a ton of blue cards, I might know that blue-green specifically is open. So if there's some cards that's only good in the blue-green archetype, maybe I can pick those up, or maybe I should be drafting some of the better uncommons. Maybe I can just draft the uncommon and try to get a couple of the blue cards, but know that the green-blue core is there. So it matters a lot more in sets with defined archetypes where blue-green might have cards that no other deck wants. So if the format's a tribal set, and for example, Ixalan, where blue-green was the merfolk colors, if I figure out that blue-green specifically is open, I might be getting some merfolk cards that nobody else wants later on. And then the final type of signal that you can get is a build-around signal. So in some sets, there are build-around cards that are quite strong, but they use cards from the draft that nobody else wants. So a common example is Innistrad, where spider spawning was a deck, and I'm not going to go into how that deck worked, but essentially there was multiple pieces for that deck that you wanted that pretty much nobody else wanted a lot of the time. So if you see one of those late and you already have a spider spawning maybe, then you might be able to think, okay, maybe this archetype is open, even if the colors themselves are not particularly open for just playing. If I was saying blue-green good stuff, that might not be open, but blue-green of a certain archetype it might be. So that's also more important when the sets have more defined archetypes and build-around cards in them. So once you've picked up on a signal, it's important to know how to act on the signal. And it's not always correct to just immediately jump in on a signal, and in fact that is most often incorrect. The process you want to use is you usually want to take a hedge pick. So what that means is when you see the late red card that we were mentioning before, say I see a 5th pick red card that's like the best red common in my opinion, and I decide, okay, red might be open. What I want to do is I want to hedge, and what I mean by hedging is you're going to take the red card, but you're not going to commit to red just because you take it. You're taking it in case you see more red cards. So for example, if I had the choice and if I'd taken 4 white cards to start my draft, and then I see this red card, and I also see a mediocre white card, I could take the red card to hedge, because if I end up in red, then I'm going to have a much better deck than if I take the mediocre white card, even though the mediocre white card is pretty much guaranteed to make my deck. The second step when you're acting on signals is to commit to colors. You don't want to just be reading signals the entire draft. At a certain point, you do want to commit to your colors. So when you think you've read enough signals to figure out what colors are open, then you can just commit to the 2 colors that you want, and at that point you pretty much stop reading signals because you do want to end up making playables. So if I've committed to red-white and then I see a strong blue card in pack 3, I'm just going to ignore it and just stick to my colors. And then the third thing you can do when you're acting on signals is you can see the signal and then choose to ignore it. And there are rare cases where you're going to want to do this. The first one is where you think it's too late in the draft to pick up that color. So if I'm 8 picks in and I have 4 red cards and 4 white cards and I see a strong black card, then I might just not take the black card and just stick to my 2 colors that I already have, even if it might mean that black was open, because I might be worried about reaching playables. And then the second major case where you're going to want to ignore a signal is if you have a very, very, very strong rare. So like if you have like a pack rat, which was one of the best draft cards of all time, and it's in black. So say I first picked a pack rat, and then I'm going around the table and I don't see any great black cards. I have maybe a couple mediocre ones. And so I'm figuring out that I could be drafting blue-white, and those are the most open colors. But I do have this pack rat. So a lot of the time when you have a rare that is that strong, it's worth having slightly weaker other cards around it if it means you can play that rare. So I might just accept the fact that black isn't open and then just draft either black-blue or black-white, depending. Now, when you are reading signals, there are 2 types. There is the signals you're receiving and the signals you're sending, and those are both from the right and the left. So when you're drafting, you have a person to your right that's passing to you pack 1 and pack 3, and a person to your left that's passing to you in pack 2, and vice versa with you passing. So you're passing to the person to your left for pack 1 and 3, and you're passing to the person to your right for pack 2. And a lot of the time, people get worried about the signals that they're sending. Like they think in their first pick of the draft, they're like, oh my gosh, I took this great white rare, but I also passed the best white common. So now I'm putting myself in trouble because I'm putting the guy to my left in white, and now I'm never going to get any white cards pack 2. And people really overthink it. And the important thing to realize is that the person to your right is much more important than the person to your left, because they are passing to you for 2 packs. So you're seeing twice as many cards from them. And also you have a better sense of what they're doing when you're going into pack 3. So what I mean by this is, if I'm reading a signal in pack 1 and I figure out that green-black is open, then in pack 2, I'm getting passed by a completely different person, but I know that in pack 3, if I read the signal correctly, I should be getting hooked up with all of those sweet black-green cards that I want. Which means that if you figure out if you take a couple picks to figure out what the signal you're seeing is, which you should be doing, you shouldn't just be assuming that your colors are open, then if I'm, say, 5 picks into the pack from my right and I figure out that black-green's open, or I think black-green's open, then it means that I get an entire pack 3 where I know what's going to be coming to me. If I'm reading signals from the left, I figure it out 5 picks into my second pack, which already is kind of rough because I already have my 2 colors, presumably by that point. Then jumping into a signal is much more risky than it would be if I was just if I was going from the right. So if you're seeing, say, in pack 2, a lot of the time you'll see strong cards in a color that you're not playing, just because it means you're reading signals correctly. So, for example, this is just a common scenario. If the person to my right is playing red-white, and I'm getting hooked up with all the black-green cards that they don't want, that means that the person to my left is not seeing any red-white cards, because the person to my right is taking all of them. And which means that if I'm not seeing any good red-white cards, the person to my left is probably not seeing any good red-white cards either. So that means in pack 2, I might be seeing all these great red-white cards that I can't really play because I'm playing black-green. And I might think, oh man, maybe I read the signals wrong. A lot of people might think that, but it's really a thing that you need to avoid, because it just means that you're doing something right. If you're seeing a bunch of cards pack 2 that aren't your color, then it means you're probably not sharing color with your neighbor, which is a good thing. It might seem counterintuitive. There are some scenarios where it's correct to switch colors. If you think that, say I first picked a white rare, and then pack 2 I'm seeing all the white cards I needed to support it that I couldn't play before, sometimes it's correct to switch, but usually you want to stick to your guns that you figured out in pack 1. Now here we're going to cover some common signal reading traps. The first of which is jumping into a signal too early. So I see a second pick, I open a red card that's really strong, I take it. Second pick, I see a strong blue card, and I'm like, well, blue must be open, and I just jump in. Or, that's an extreme example, but even like 4th pick, if I've been playing red, if I've taken a red card, green card, and then I see a blue card, and I'm like, well, this blue card's the best blue common, it shouldn't be in the pack still, I'll take it, blue must be open. You really have to see each signal as just one signal, and then you have to put them all together to really figure out what color is going to be open for you, or what archetype is going to be open for you. You can't jump in too early. The second trap is what I briefly mentioned before when I was talking about right versus left. It's baiting yourself in pack 2. So if I'm drafting a great green-black deck, and then pack 2 I'm seeing all these white cards, and I switch out my green for white because I'm like, well, I'm seeing all these great white cards. And then in pack 3, you end up with all the black-green cards again, and then you have all these white cards that you were taking instead of the green cards, and you just end up with a a bit of a 3-color mess at sometimes. So you really don't want to bait yourself in pack 2. Sometimes you want to switch. Sometimes you just want to stick to your guns, and that's going to be most often the case. The third trap is to waffle too much, which means that you see each card as a signal, which is a bit of an overreaction. So you're like, 5th pick, you see a great red card, you take it. 6th pick, you see a great black card, you take it. And then you just start taking the best card out of every pack and seeing everything as a signal, and you end up in a bit of a troublesome scenario there. So you end up with like 5 colors after pack 1, and you really don't have a strong idea of what you're doing. And then the fourth problem is similar to the waffling problem. It's when you jump into a signal too late, so you're like all the way at the end of pack 1 and you see a good red card and you're like, well, I have 5 black cards and I have 5 green cards, but I'm going to take this red card anyway and see what happens. And that is also a problem that can occur, so you want to try and avoid that if you can. So to summarize, signals are subjective and are never concrete. You just have to make sure that you are treating each one as a signpost and never as the law, as it were. Also important to note is that other people might evaluate cards differently than you. So even if you think a card is great, the person to your right might not think so. So you have to make sure that you aren't saying, oh my gosh, it's the best red common, when most people are like, oh, the red common's fine, but not insane. Secondly, it is important to remember that there are several types of signals. There's the monocolored signal, which is the most common type, and then there's also gold card signals and build-around signals. 3 is the proper way to respond to signals. First, you want to hedge your bets, figure out if the color actually is open, and then you want to commit the signal, and then sometimes you can just choose to ignore the signal in certain circumstances. Fourth, it is important to remember that right is more important than left, both for sending signals and receiving signals. Just if you figure out a color is open pack 1, you should probably stick to it. And then number 5 is do not fall into a signal reading trap. And that is going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to click that thumbs up and subscribe to get updates for whenever I post new content. If you have any questions about signal reading that you would like me to answer in more detail, I would be happy to respond, and just leave those in the comments section down below. And I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you next time.